and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I hope everyone is doing well. We are Team Home Alone, and we wanted to talk about working remotely. The presenters will be Amanda and myself. My name is Daniel, and before we get started, I want to give a big shout out to our research team, Yuna, Rachel, Claire, and Mohammed. With the drastic changes caused by the pandemic known as COVID-19, we, human beings, have been forced once again to adapt in order to survive. One of the methods we came up with was working remotely. The immediate reaction would be, oh, this is great, no commuting. However, the question remains, is this a blessing or a curse? In this presentation, we'll be discussing three subsets of working remotely: transitioning to remote life, economy and productivity, and lastly, personal and professional life. Amanda, want to start us off?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the transition that certain office jobs and non-desk jobs had to take during the COVID-19 pandemic. As seen on the slide, approximately 40% of workers in the US were able to transition to remote working, while 60% either lost their positions or had to continue working in contact with others. I'm specifically going to focus on these two generalized situations. So, desk jobs that took place within office spaces had a much easier transition into remote working due to the nature of the work. Setting up a desk and computer at home can be much simpler to transfer into a remote situation compared to jobs that require in-person interactions. In these cases, the transition to a new working environment during the COVID-19 pandemic was focused on a change of location without loss of job and significant change in income. Though this can still be considered significantly stressful, research has shown that the overall adjustment to remote work was about 3.9 out of 5, and the average stress level was about 2.75 within these jobs. Throughout this transition, many companies also worked with their employees to create a better work from home environment. The benefits of transferring to a remote work environment from an office can be seen in the time saved from lack of commute, as well as the ability to improve desk spaces and the atmosphere of the working environment. So now I'll be switching to the 60% of workers that were unable to transition, and these were predominantly made out of non-office desk positions such as transportation, food service, cleaning, retail, etc. Throughout the course of the pandemic, many workers who were unable to work remotely struggled due to the newfound risk of their work environment. According to a recent study from the University of Washington, the majority of workers are at an increased risk of exposure to the virus, as well as an increased risk of layoffs, furloughs, and hour reductions. So moving on, I will now be focusing more on the economic side of these two groups. Most industries with an office setting benefited from the transition to remote working financially. Not only does a remote setup ensure workers' health and safety, but it is also good for business. Employers were able to save money on rent, office supplies, etc., while a number of experts expect more employees to work from home once the quarantine is over, given the benefit of working remotely and seeing how it has positively affected productivity and costs. On the flip side, industries that gained customers from those office employees were hit hard, such as the food and beverage industries. This can be seen in small businesses, restaurants, and food trucks near offices that are no longer seeing their regular customers. The immediate access to a private kitchen while working remotely directly correlates to the lack of need for buying food at those locations during work breaks. This has led to the decline of many restaurants and led to many of them closing their doors permanently. Economists project that more than 100,000 small businesses have shut down permanently since the pandemic escalated in March, according to a study by researchers at the University of Illinois, Harvard Business School, Harvard University, and the University of Chicago. So I'm now going to talk a little more specifically about the ways remote working has saved many employers and employees from the extra expenses required with a specific job site. While everyone can agree that virtual meetings and interactions cannot be compared to the value of face-to-face interactions, the savings might make up for those cons, considering that office space is not being used 50 to 60% of the time. A typical employer can save about $22,000 a year for every employee who works remotely, and employees can save between $5,000 to $8,000 a year and even more if they move to a less expensive area and work remotely full-time. This estimates that remote working could save U.S. employers over $30 billion a day during this crisis and what would have otherwise been lost productivity with office closures.
Wow, that's a lot of money. Let us examine next the impact working remotely has on our personal and professional life. Some of the pros that we found were that having freedom to manage your own time, and as a result, having extra time with the family, and of course, no commuting. While some might find it easier to manage their newfound freedom, others have found it particularly difficult figuring out a balance between work and home life. In addition, losing in-person interaction for prolonged periods of time often leaves one forgetting common social etiquettes and can turn you into a social recluse. Next, we'll be taking a look at the impact working remotely has on productivity. In a recent survey taken among 800 employers, studies have shown productivity was actually higher than pre-COVID times, with increased task completion rates as well as higher activity levels during work hours. Who would have thunk it? But of course, not everything is sunshine and rainbows. As to be expected, there are some drawbacks from working remotely. Those with children found it particularly difficult juggling distance learning while managing their work responsibilities. In addition, distractions are likely to occur more often while working remotely. As you can imagine, with the positive mainly outweighing the negatives in working remotely, employees and employers have expressed a want and need for flexibility from pre-COVID office norms. Future Forum research shows that only 12% of people surveyed want to go back to a full-time office work and 72 want a hybrid of remote work moving forward. The pandemic forced many companies and industries to transition to a whole new style of working, one that many have been pushing for a long time. It's also promoted more conversations about working conditions and the flexibility of schedules, also the importance of work-life balance when the two are now taking place in the same location. These benefits brought up the question, is a 9 to 5 office position actually necessary for the productivity of the employees and the success of a company? As we reach the conclusion to our presentation, here are some of our takeaways. The one point that I wanted to focus on is the very last bullet point. It's the idea that remote work is very nice and very tempting for most. However, the reality is that not all Americans have this luxury as an option. The biggest concern would be that what would happen to the present-day labor force or companies that are unable to pivot to an online platform? That's an estimated 500 million jobs lost. And on that somber note, any closing statements, Amanda?
Yeah, thanks again, Daniel. So I will continue with some of the tips we have researched for increasing productivity and emotional well-being while working remotely. Our research team summarized the most common tips recommended for creating a productive workday while working from home. Firstly, dressing as though you're going to the office can help start your day with a correct mindset to work effectively. This goes hand in hand with having a dedicated workspace that you can associate with being productive and on task. This can mean separating your space with dividers if you are unable to have a separate room, such as an office, making sure that you will have everything you need to work in one space. Keeping that space tidy, as well as informing those living with you that you are currently working. The goal of this space is to minimize the distractions that you would normally face in your home while you are on the clock. Another recommendation is to have an accountability partner, someone who you can communicate with regularly to help you stay on task, troubleshoot problems with, and check in with to help keep you from feeling too isolated when working alone. Scheduling is also very important while at home. Since you are often by yourself and cannot structure your day based on others within a group environment, giving yourself a regular routine can help you stay on track. Going hand in hand with scheduling is breaks. Everyone needs time throughout their day to take a breather. Remember to move your body, stretch, eat lunch, etc. outside of your workspace to take care of yourself so you can be productive when returning to work. Lastly, remember to stay connected with your coworkers, supervisors, and others. Respond to emails and messages promptly, and always remember to ask for help when needed. To conclude our presentation, here are some of the summarizing points regarding the pros and cons of working remotely. The good includes no commute and saving time, as well as comfortability, flexible working hours, more time with family, your own working environment, and being able to control your own work-life balance. Some of the negatives can be seen in the lack of human interaction and increased isolation. It also can be harder to separate private and business life when they're in the same location, and this could lead to overworking. There are also many distractions in the home, such as pets and family members, or even the TV or your bed. There can also be a lack of motivation and a workplace disconnect from not necessarily having an entire dedicated space that's away from your home to work. And lastly, home office costs. Not everyone has the space or money to afford the proper desk setup to complete their job. So that concludes our presentation. I would like to once again thank our research team for accumulating the information on these slides and creating our PowerPoint.